We'll show you two speeches. First, music producer Reginald Jones on race issues and affirmative action. This is an hour, and it begins with introductory remarks.
Good, everybody, can you get started again? That'd be great. We could take our seats and quiet down. You ready for the next speaker? It has been my experience that Young America's Foundation speakers are usually just as thrilled to be with and interact with students as you are to have them speaking at your events. Perennial favorite Reginald Jones is no exception. Equally at home at the podium or an informal late-night chat with students, Mr. Jones has been impressing and sometimes enraging young people all over the country since joining the Foundation's lecture program in 1997. As a 20-year veteran of the entertainment industry, Reginald has worn the hats of promoter, performer, and even radio talk show host. He really has done it all, from working with artists like Patti LaBelle and New Edition, being the voice behind the mic on shows like Generation Now on the Radio American Network, and even singing backup for the legendary group Parliament Funkadelic. He brings his wealth of experience, common sense, and great sense of humor to the stage today. Whether you agree with what he has to say or not, you are certainly in for a treat this morning. So please join me in welcoming a gentleman, a family man, and as you'll see, one of the most well-dressed people I know, Mr. Reginald Jones.
Thank you. Good morning. This on? Good morning. I mean, if I didn't wake up, I'm sure my suit will. I wanted to talk to you today about the issue of race, which has been foremost in our news, especially recently. Last weekend, the NAACP held their annual convention in Miami, and 3 presidential candidates, Democrats, failed to show. And did they ever pay for that one? Kwesi Mfume, the president of the NAACP, took to the podium and told them for all intents and purposes they were politically dead in the black community. And nothing brings me more joy than to see Democrats grovel. The 3 candidates in question, Joe Lieberman, Dennis Kucinich, and I can't remember the third one. Was it Gephardt? Dick Gephardt, running back with their tails between their legs, groveling, asking for penance and forgiveness for their unpardonable sin of daring not to show up for the organization that speaks for all blacks, the NAACP. And it's amazing, I've said this before, anytime that there's a political rally in front of a black audience, the speakers always have to put on their best preacher voice. Remember Al Gore got away with this. I don't know where Barry Lynn was on this, but Al Gore said that the glory of the Lord shall be, the glory of the Lord shall be revealed. Because they think that's what gets black folks off. You know, the whole preacher thing. And this week, Dennis Kucinich went into Amazing Grace. And actually, he got some words wrong. He didn't even put any stank on it. It was so flat. It had absolutely no soul to it. But he went into Amazing Grace. I think he said, how good the sound or something like that. And, you know, he didn't give it any oomph. But the hyperbole from Kwesi Mfume, that their political capital was as, I'm paraphrasing here, was as good as Confederate dollars. Always the analogy to slavery. This is their stock and trade, Jim Crow and slavery. Now, those of you are obviously in college, you know what Black History Month is like on your campuses. Only a certain type of speaker is welcome on your campus, especially those of you who have had me on your campus, like, right, Steve? On your campuses during Black History Month, know that Black History Month really isn't Black History Month. It's leftist History Month. Because I was just mentioning Steve Hinkle from Cal Poly. I think it was this year, last year, you had Mason Weaver. And the title of his book was It's All Right to Leave the Plantation. Now that's the title of his book. And Steve and others were putting up posters at the school to advertise the title of the speech. And on the poster, you actually see the brother's picture, Mason's picture. Well, the school had a cow because this was offensive, especially the word plantation. And they've been raking the poor guy over the coals. They did the same thing last year when I was there. I spoke during Black History Month, and what outraged them was the overwhelmingly positive reaction from the overwhelmingly leftist audience. Am I correct? Oh, they couldn't stand it. So the fact that they couldn't tear my speech apart, they reverted to complaining that there were white students out there with flashlights at night, mind you, guiding people to the auditorium. So they used this saying, well, the flashlights were threatening. That black students felt threatened because the white students had flashlights. And after all, police have brutalized blacks with flashlights. You see the kind of tortured nonsense you have to go through. And a reporter from the school newspaper interviewed me, and we got into a discussion about the hullabaloo about me speaking during Black History Month, that this was an offense to the black students. First of all, they should have been asked, that the college Republicans should have had their permission to have me speak during Black History Month. But being that the reaction from those very same students was so positive, she reverted to, well, if they had known what you were going to say before you spoke, then it would have been a different reaction. So now I have to have my speech filtered to make sure it fits a certain ideology before I can open my mouth during Black History Month. And when I confronted her with this, I said, so you're saying that a black person should not speak other than what he is told? I know how to play the race card too when I have to. So, no. Oh, yes. As whatever audience I speak in front of, sometimes you're taking your chances. Not that I'm going to say anything foul or anything else like that, especially on TV. My parents could be watching. But to say that I have to have what I say authorized by the Black Student Union, that's in itself racist. You heard Roger Custer speak last night. He was at Ithaca College, who brought me in there, I think now 2 years ago. And this was one of the most incredible things that have ever happened to me. Leading up to the event, I thought the 60s were dead. Well, that idea has gone out of the window. There was so much protest, and it was so vocal, and it was so nasty. The faculty protest was being led by a professor from Pakistan who felt that and these are her words, his being black is not a sufficient enough condition. Now it's a condition, like I got this from global warming. That is not a sufficient enough condition to allow him to speak during Black History Month. That because I do not agree with their political idea of what Black History Month means, therefore I should not be allowed to speak during Black History Month. And there was a student from Turkey. I'm not naming any names because the guy apologized after the thorough tongue lashing I gave him, not him in particular, but the whole speech was so great, if I may say so myself, that he apologized. So I can't name him, but he had produced these flyers and emails, sending them out to students for them to have seminars, basically, to prepare to, and this is a direct quote, grill this son of a motherless goat. That's how nasty it got. He himself, he was not black, a student from Turkey. And that's because black now we're not actually a race of people, but a political club that one can join and also be excommunicated from. And if you don't believe me, check out what's about to happen in Arkansas. The former president of the United States, Bill Clinton, is about to be inducted into the Arkansas Black Hall of Fame as an honorary black. I'm not kidding. Now, how do you become an honorary black? Did somebody say Michael Jackson over there? Honorary black. Being African American is not hereditary. It's a thought. That's what makes you black. The way you think, the way you act, the way you walk and talk, and it's never positive. If you look at our videos today, especially rap videos, the word gangster and thug is repeated over and over and over again. The way women are depicted, and I don't care what video it is, just press the mute button, sit back and watch the video, and I guarantee you won't be able to tell me what the song is about. It could be, a song could be fishing in the stream, you know what I mean? And you'll see them, you know. But nobody ever questions the blackness of one of those rappers because he's keeping it real. He's got street cred. You tell I watch a lot of Austin Powers, right? He's got street cred. And no one ever attacks them as an Oreo, an Uncle Tom. But if you're articulate, well-educated, you love your family, you're, for all intents and purposes, a religious man, then you're trying to be white, especially when you're articulate. And this also puts whites in a very untenable position because whites are now in a position of trying to say the right things to show how not racist they are. You know, especially when I hear, you know, when I see you, I don't see a black man. You know, I don't think of you as black. You know how ridiculous that sounds? But this is the position that you're put in. This is a position that people have been put in because they want to say exactly the right thing to make sure that they have cover from nasty accusations, most of the time which are not true. And this also puts blacks in a bad position. It puts us in a position of inferiority. And like I said, just look at Black History Month, especially on television. This year, as in every year, I've been saying this for 3 or 4 years now, and it hasn't changed. Every year, HBO will show the movie Boycott, which is mostly about the Montgomery bus boycott. CBS did a movie about Rosa Parks. HBO also showed the movie, I think it was Amistad, and there was a movie about the Middle Passage, the slavery Middle Passage, which was a major part of the Black Holocaust, all the lives that were lost from between Africa and America. And that's it. Other than that, you will hear maybe like a few second snippets during those McDonald's commercials. You know, McDonald's salutes Black History Month. And they'll show maybe George Washington Carver or Booker T. Washington, something like that, but that's it. And you're not thinking about them, you're thinking about getting a Big Mac. You're not thinking about the contributions, the great contributions that blacks have made in this country and through the world over. How soldiers who fought in the Vietnam War saw statues carved in the mountains of people who look just like us. And all they can talk about is slavery and Jim Crow. Because the idea that they want to take hold in your minds is black people are good for one thing and one thing only, being long-suffering underdogs. And that's it. Instead of being who we actually are, the New York Yankees, they want us to think that we're the Detroit Tigers. Or the Chicago Cubs, for those of you from Chicago. That's what they want us to think. No other ethnic group in this world would ever make themselves out to be the lowest guy on the totem pole and make it an article of faith. If you ever see C-SPAN broadcast this meeting called Black America, Where Do We Go From Here? It's hosted by Tavis Smiley. And they had one in Philadelphia last year, in fact. And every year you hear the same things. And really nothing concrete comes out of it that's really going to make a difference. But you do hear some like the best applause lines. Everybody tries to get the best applause line. And woe unto those who are on the podium with Al Sharpton, because you're not going to outdo him on that one. You know, especially when he gets with that, what is it, those that are my skin folk ain't my kinfolk. Meaning those are the same color aren't all his family. Thank God. But this is what black leadership is engaged in. It's a game that's being played, and not only are white people the victim, but blacks are the victim. Because then when, especially young people, are told that from the time that they're born, from the time that they get up in the morning and go out into the world to the time they come home, that the white man will determine the outcome of his life. Just look at the 2000 elections, especially in Florida. Folks is down there losing their minds. And when the reporters were addressed black people, it was Armageddon. It was the end of the world for us because George Bush might actually make it into the White House. And that our lot in life is not made up by us, and certainly not by God, but by a Republican in the White House. That we had 8 years of the greatest prosperity that black people ever saw, none of which we were responsible for. Bill Clinton did it all. He did all of it. Funny thing, they didn't say that during the 1980s. During the 1980s, blacks were rightly credited with our great advances, though the policies of Ronald Reagan must have had something to do with that, but no one ever said that. All they talked about was Reagan's war on blacks. His genocide, especially when the crack epidemic came, they blamed that on him as well. But Bill Clinton saved black America. And now he's about to go into the Arkansas Black Hall of Fame. That's insanity. Think of that. It's like I would be inducted into the Italian Hall of Fame because I happen to know the Godfather movie by heart. That does not, and now check that out. Everybody knows about the HBO program, The Sopranos. Italian-American groups across this country have been trying to get that show off the air since it first came on because of the negative connotation as they see it, the way that makes people see Italian-Americans. They protest. We are hardworking, law-abiding citizens. We are not all members of La Cosa Nostra. And yet, many of our, especially black youth, want to put out the image of gangster, thug life. Where's the protest? Who's holding them accountable? In the early days of hip hop, I remember NAACP and others would say that this was a waste of time, it would never amount to anything. But now there's a lot of money involved. And they want to be able to reach the youth, and they think everybody black can rap. We all can't rap. But that's the expectation. So they're down with the program. And with a negative image of an Italian, and when it's someone like James Gandolfini or something is giving an award, they protest. This man should not be given an award for his depiction of Italians. But Bill Clinton can get an award based on the fact that an author, Toni Morrison, says he has all the tropes of blackness. Single parenthood, poverty, an uncontrollable sexual appetite. I'm paraphrasing here. All the negative things, and they said this is what makes him black. That's an example we want the whole world to hold. And then when he goes to Africa, they treat him like a hero, even though he allowed all those Africans to be slaughtered in Rwanda and did nothing. He goes to Africa and apologizes to them for slavery. Excuse me, the people you should apologize to are actually here. They were part of that whole deal. But it's all according to the letter next to your name makes all the difference in the world. Look at what happened to Trent Lott, poor Trent. Last year at, I think it might have been, I saw it on C-SPAN 3. There actually is a C-SPAN 3. And it was the celebration for Senator Thurmond, the late Senator Thurmond. And We all remember it well now. Trent Lott gets to the microphone and says, in 1948, my state of Mississippi, when Strom Thurmond ran for president, we voted for him. And we're proud of it. And if he had won, we wouldn't have had all these problems we've had. Well, you could have heard a feather drop in that room because you heard a noticeable gasp. Nobody could believe it. Like, oh, tell me he didn't just say that. Sound like Booker T from WWE. Tell me he didn't just say that. But it was out there. Now, when he said it, I remember just being in shock. You know, you think of the ghosts of Emmett Till and Medgar Evers and Shirley Cheney and Goodman and others. So, you know, understand those who were put off by what he said. Try to see their point of view on that just for a second. But then nothing. I thought, you know, oh, here we go. This is going to be a story by tomorrow. And it wasn't. It took about 4 or 5 days, or 3 or 4 days. And I remember Tim Russert mentioning it on Meet the Press. But not much was really made of it. But then it just kept building. They wouldn't let it go. It kept building. Next thing you know, Spike Lee, who's produced such blockbuster movies as Spike Lee was on ABC's Good Morning America, I think it was. And he talked about Trent Lott being a Klansman. And this type of nonsense was thrown all over the place. And then poor Trent goes on BET. And he's groveling. You know, I could have just told Trent, save your breath, man. It's not going to make any difference. You know, he's going to do what he can for the new religion of today, diversity. And it was just horrible to watch. But the story just kept building. Jesse Jackson and others are calling for him to resign from the Senate. He should not be the leader of the Senate. This man should not be next in line for the presidency. He wasn't. And it appears saying, you know, there are others like him, and this is what the Republican Party is at its core. This is the party that people forget that the Ku Klux Klan declared war on during the late 1800s, especially on people, and you're in good company if you get called this, the radical Republicans. Yeah, that's where that term was first used. The radicals, because they believe not only in abolition, but for equal rights for blacks in America. Not the middle of the road stuff, not what Lincoln was talking about, recolonizing us back to Africa, but true freedom and equality right here in America. And that was a radical right-wing ideology. So you're in good company. Remember that. And they're comparing Lott and others to the Ku Klux Klan. Now, let's put on our thinking caps, boys and girls. They're upset because they say this man should not be in the leadership post in the United States Senate. Has anybody here heard of a man named Robert C. Byrd? Senator from West Virginia. Now get this, America. Democrat from West Virginia. He was president pro tempore of the Senate. He was first senator, only senator in line for the presidency. A Democrat. There were no protests for any of the civil rights groups at all when this man was president pro tem of the Senate, nor during the 70s and 80s when he was the majority leader of the Senate. You never see a media, New York Times, Washington Post, or others say Robert Byrd, former Grand Kleagle of the Ku Klux Klan. Now I've seen Kwesi and Fume and others say, we believe in redemption. Really? What they mean is, if you pass the right amount of socialism, all is forgiven. Because black people belong not to God, but to the communist movement, as they see it. Something that one of my heroes, Marcus Garvey, fought vehemently against. And a great author named Zora Neale Hurston. She was an author during the 20s through the 60s. And she referred to the mainstream black leadership as the sobbing school of Negrohood. And she said that in 1951, she wrote an article that says, "Why the Negro Won't Buy Communism." and she attacked communists for trying to make blacks the new proletariat. And she was, of course, harangued by the main mainstream black leadership of her time. But Robert Byrd, a man who was chief recruiter for the Ku Klux Klan, but can't remember whether or not he was involved in any lynchings of African Americans. Don't you think that that's something that American people have a right to know? Whether a man who's sitting in the Senate, a man who, if God forbid the Democrats recontrol the Senate, could be president pro tem of the Senate again? Don't you think the American people have a right to know that? Don't you think that if Trent Lott were actually involved in any kind of hate group such as that actually physically attacked African Americans, that there would be a probe right now to find that out? No, actually, you're wrong. There wouldn't be a probe to find that out, because we'd have found out a long time ago. We'd know that long before now. But here you actually have a Klansman in the Senate, and people don't mention it. The Republicans are too polite to mention it. His Republican colleagues in the Senate. When Trent Lott was going through all of that, why didn't somebody say, hey, wait a minute, let's have equal standards here? If you're saying you're accusing a man who has never been a part of the Klan of being a Klansman, then let's check out the guy who actually was and find out what he actually did. Did he burn any crosses on the lawns of African Americans in West Virginia? I think I'd like to know the answer to that question. But now Trent Lott loses his leadership position, and we move on. A double standard. I thought we were for equality. A blatant double standard. The same goes with Mr. Clinton. Now, Arkansas, you would think, knowing him better than anybody else, should know better than to make this man part of any kind of Hall of Fame. How many people remember Lonnie Guinier? Remember that name, Lonnie Guinier? Lonnie Guinier was nominated, I think it was 1993, to be the head of the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department. In the 1980s, I think it was 1987, she was the lawyer that led the movement to sue Bill Clinton in federal court for violating the Voting Rights Act. And the judge said that Clinton had tried to dilute the black vote and knock out a black official in favor of a white friend of his. It was the same year he was sued in federal court for his racial profiling policy. Does that ring a bell with anybody, racial profiling? We've been told that it's a bad thing. He was sued in federal court. And when he found out that he was sued in federal court, that he had lost his case, he went before the state legislature and told them he didn't care what the law said. What a shock. That they needed this racial profiling law because of the drugs that especially Hispanics were bringing into Arkansas. The death penalty is a big issue in presidential politics. At least it was in 2000. And in 2000, there was a brother on death row in Texas. I believe his name was Gary Graham. And he was about to be executed. President Bush was still Governor Bush at that time. Geraldo Rivera, late of Fox fame, was on CNBC at that time. They actually interrupted regular programming on CNBC to go to Texas to highlight the execution of Gary Graham. And Geraldo is appealing to Governor Bush. Governor Bush, if you really want to show true solidarity with the African American community, then you will stop the execution of Gary Graham. Gary Graham's execution went forward. They actually showed the brothers' spiritual advisors, Jesse Jackson and Al Sharpton, leaving the execution chamber very solemn-faced. It was like a pall fell over the evening. Where were those same people 8 years previous in Arkansas when Ricky Ray Rector was executed by Bill Clinton? A retarded man They say he had the mind of a 5-year-old. He was so severely retarded. When he was eating his last meal, he didn't realize it was his last meal. And he sees Governor Clinton on television. He's waving to the television and asks his guards to tell Governor Clinton that he said hi. And the governor's on TV talking about executing him. He doesn't even know it. He left his, I think it was a piece of pie or something on his plate, asked him to keep it warm for him till he came back, as they're taking him to his execution. Why was he executed? The Jennifer Flowers situation had just blown up in his face. He needed to change the subject, and he needed to show middle America that he was a new Democrat. He's not like the old style Democrats. He knows how to keep the black vote in line. He doesn't have to kowtow to us anymore, which he proved by giving the verbal smackdown to Jesse Jackson and Sister Soldier in front of a worldwide audience to show, hey, he really is a new type of Democrat. He's not going to just grovel in front of Jesse and the other civil rights leaders anymore. And he got away with it. Maxine Waters and others, Susan Sarandon and the rest of their friends, nobody protested to save the life of Ricky Ray Rector. And if the lives of black people have to be sacrificed to advance the cause of Marxism, then so be it. Look at what's going on in Cuba right now. Fidel Castro's Cuba, Danny Glover's best friend. Just recently, Tres Negritos, as Castro called them, the 3 little blacks. And these are names you will never hear at an NAACP meeting. Eusebio Peñalva, Barbaro Garcia, Lorenzo Castillo, and Jorge Martinez Isaac were executed for daring to try to live what God gave them, their freedom. They were just executed by Castro, summarily executed by Castro in Cuba. While the tyranny in Cuba is 100% white, the prison population in Cuba, even though blacks are a minority in Cuba, the prison population is 80% black. Just 5 years ago, he passed a decree called 217, and the State Department were warning blacks not to travel to Cuba. They didn't have to tell me twice. Because blacks, they limited their migration and their job opportunities. The oppression in Cuba is worse for the Afro-Cubans than it is for anybody else in Cuba. Now, if we can have the divestiture movements on our college campuses during the 1980s and the music videos like I Ain't Gonna Play Sun City, do not the Afro-Cubans deserve the same in our own hemisphere? Eusebio Peñalva, whose name I mentioned earlier, a black Cuban exile, was jailed by Castro from 1960 to 1988. He was their Mandela. Mandela spent less time in prison than this brother did. Do you ever hear his name mentioned by your college professors? Do you ever see CNN doing a profile, people in the news, on Eusebio? Never. And then when this issue was brought up in Miami recently, when the NAACP meeting was there, and they confronted Kwesi Nkrumah and others with this, you know what their answer was? We need to diplomatically discuss this thing and build coalitions and all this other nonsense. No attack. People in Hollywood signing letters backing Castro's Cuba. A murderer, an oppressor, and yet he's applauded like a saint. Even though he is oppressing blacks. The difference, in South Africa, the oppressors were white, but they weren't communists. The ANC was. See, so it's not about the people, it's about the ideology. It's just like why here in Washington, D.C., even though the elite blacks would send their kids to the private schools, the very same people want poor blacks to stay in government schools. To schools where they won't even send their own children. It's the same exact thing. Or in the Sudan, when there's slavery going on right now. These people, we're talking about reparations in America now. There's slavery going on right now. the Islamic North and Marxist North oppressing the Christians in the South. Where are the peace marches? They just had a peace march yesterday, didn't they? In DuPont Circle, someone mentioned last night. Where are the movements for those blacks? We're hearing President Bush is right now caught up in this thing about 16 words in the State of the Union address about the intelligence and whether or not we should have gone to war with Iraq. And I have my own theory on that. I won't get into it right now. I'll save that for the bull session. But what about the intelligence that led to the bombing of an aspirin factory in the Sudan? And the lives that were taken by Bill Clinton's need to get Monica off the front pages? No, not a word of protest from the very same people that are holding President Bush to a different standard. Where was the intelligence for that? The United States government had to actually pay damages for what he did. And what about the lives that were lost because that pharmaceutical factory was blown up? The needed medicines for people in Sudan. Where's the protest? But he can do that, even take the lives of innocent black people, because Bill Clinton himself is blacker than any black man has ever been. And we cannot allow them to get away with this. You see it on your college campuses. A leftist speaker can come in, have their speech. I don't see you guys burning their posters, physically attacking them, questioning their ethnicity. I don't care how many college campuses I go to. People cannot be convinced that I am actually black before they've heard a word I've said. It's about expectations. As long as we can get whites to look at us as in a certain way, then we don't have to be responsible for anything we do. We don't have to be responsible for the outcomes of my life or the place that we're in. I will never again allow anybody, I had to when I was growing up, I had parents, let anybody have power over me again, except God himself. I respect authority, don't get me wrong, but not in the way that these people mean. If black people from time immemorial thought the way black leadership today, we wouldn't even be here. They say, you don't think black. I see a light bulb, I'm thinking black. I see a golf tee, I'm thinking black. I see a peanut, I see a jar of peanut butter, I'm thinking black. I see a home run travel 550 feet, I'm thinking black. I hear jazz, I'm thinking black. But if I'm thinking that I can't do something, that I'm not intelligent enough to pass the same test that you can pass, according to them, then I'm really thinking black. We say it's racist for whites to say that blacks aren't as intelligent as anyone else, but then demand that you set up tests exactly that way. If you set up a test that says you need an 80 to pass, but just because I'm black, I only need 60 to pass, you're saying that President Bush talked about the soft bigotry of low expectations. I partially agree with him. It's not soft, it's bigotry, straighten out bigotry. If you're expecting me to fail. But then they say, well, what about diversity? Especially recently with the thing with NASCAR and Jesse Jackson. NASCAR paid some of Jesse's blackmail money, $250,000. Because Jesse was complaining there aren't enough blacks in NASCAR, or aren't any blacks in NASCAR. Now, those of you who know me know I'm probably the biggest NASCAR junkie in the world. I was wearing my Jeff Gordon outfit last night, for those of you who are wondering what that was. The four-time NASCAR Winston Cup champion, just in case I forgot to mention that. And I'm always asking, there aren't enough blacks in NASCAR. The reason that you don't see a lot of blacks in NASCAR is because there aren't any short dirt tracks in their inner cities. If you had just as many short tracks, or what they call bull rings, the sprint car tracks, in the inner cities as you have basketball courts, you would see a lot more of us participating in this sport. But you don't see any blacks on the water polo team. I don't see anybody complaining about that. And in the interest of diversity, ESPN and MTV both have television programs about street ball. Quintessential inner city game. And you got guys with names like Hot Sauce and Spider and Oh My God and things like that. Now, Hispanics happen to be the largest minority as of the last census. diversity, anyone? How come we don't see the right percentage of Hispanics on the street ball, on ESPN street ball? Why aren't you writing letters to ESPN decrying their racism against Hispanics? What about the fact that they're underrepresented in the National Football League? Why is there racism against anybody that is not black playing cornerback in the National Football League? How ridiculous do we want to get with this? Well, give them room. Diversity, that's the new religion today. If something doesn't have the right racial mix, then something is wrong with it. Unless, of course, it's an arena where blacks are dominating. Big story, one of the big stories in sports this weekend was the British Open yesterday. Now, Tiger Woods finished, I think, 4th place. Had a bad back nine the whole week, in fact. And the big story in golf is that the black guy hasn't won a major. Yeah, the black guy. David Duval hasn't won one, and I don't know when. Phil Mickelson still is like 0 for forever in majors. But it's the black guy that everybody notices is in a slump, even though he's won more money and more tournaments than anybody in golf, even though he hasn't played nearly as many tournaments as everybody else. But it's the black guy is held to a higher standard. Come to any inner city doing one of those street ball games. You be the guy that gets dunked on. Yeah, guess what? Bye-bye. They'll run you out of the neighborhood. Because, and if you're a brother and you can't dunk, then you gotta go. You gotta turn in your membership card. Same thing should come to bear when it comes to academics and finance. Every year, those of you who've seen Ebony magazine, they have their most important blacks issue. And I've noticed when they had the most important blacks, especially right after Clarence Thomas became a member of the Supreme Court, everybody of real importance but him was included. Clarence Thomas is not included, a Supreme Court justice, the only black on the Supreme Court, and he's not included. Why? Because he doesn't think black. And as a youngster, I've always collected Black Enterprise magazine. They have their Black Enterprise 100s, like you have the Forbes 400s and the Fortune 500s. And I've always challenged black leadership to do this. Whenever they have these Black America, where do we go from here stuff, if you're not concretely trying to build momentum towards making the BE 100s the most profitable listing in the world, then we're wasting our time. Because that's what every other ethnic group in this country is doing. People come from all over the world, as they say, right off the boat, and where do they open up business? In the black neighborhood. And every year, we spend 99% of our time talking about Jim Crow and slavery. Not that we shouldn't talk about it, because as the Jews say, never forget. It is a part of American history, a shameful part of our history, but notice we were the first ones to do something about it. We still have brothers and sisters all over the world still living in slavery. But because they're under Marxist regimes, no one says anything. Well, at least no one on the left. This is Black Enterprise 100s, Russell Simmons on the cover, one of the godfathers of hip hop. And I collect these every year. I have for a very long time, since I was a kid. And when I was working at MCA Records in the mailroom, I would carry a copy of this and the Wall Street Journal in my briefcase. And when I first went to work there, they were telling me, brother, this is a 5-year stint. Nobody makes it out of this mailroom, especially a brother. It took me 11 months because I refused to be told, especially based on my color, that I could not do something. And I would never take part of any diversity program. They have one in NASCAR now, Dodge Diversity Program. I have too much pride in myself. I would make it on my driving skills alone. I have the 24 on the side of my car, my rainbow helmet, and go out there and win 4 Winston Cup championships, just like anybody else. And if I couldn't make it, and if I wasn't a good enough driver, then fire me. That's the standard of people of excellence. But that's exactly what they don't want you to see when you look at blacks. They want you to see pity. They want you to feel for us, not respect like you would with anyone else. They want you to see failure. They want you to see exactly the opposite of what is there. But getting back to Ebony magazine, there's a new magazine in town. It's called Savoy magazine. And this is the cover, this year's cover. Last year they had their Power 100, the most influential blacks in America. This year, look who's on the cover. And it's not black and white. It's Colin Powell. And in here you'll find leaders in entertainment, religion, literature, business, and politics, and the judiciary. And yes, they even include, number one, Clarence Thomas, Savoy magazine. And yet, you will never hear about it during Black History Month. Never hear about it. You never hear about Oscar Charleston or Cool Papa Bell or Josh Gibson during Black History Month. That's a cause of celebration. That's a cause to be in awe. Just pity. Race, all race is a tool to hammer America into submission for the communist movement, plain and simple. And they see us as their main component of that, race, just as now sexual identity is being used. And black leadership is allowing that to be equated with the civil rights movement. I didn't get this way because of anything I did. I'm black because my father and my mother are black. And no matter who I'm sleeping with, and it's my wife, but no matter who I'm sleeping with, this is what I will always be. So when next time they want to pick a race card, pick one with them. Confront them with those questions. How can Bill Clinton be thus and so when he's done A, B, C, and D against blacks? It's just because he goes to Harlem and opens up an office, he's treated like a conquering hero. If a brother like Reg rolled through there, forget it. Think on these things, especially this year. We're coming into election season, and you know how it goes. And watch them. President Bush is supposed to speak in front of the Urban League today, I believe. Watch especially the Democrat politicians. Watch Joe Lieberman, of all people, when he tries to get his good soul voice going. You know what I'm saying? Thank you very much. Questions, or is anybody scared? Wait a minute, let this gentleman catch up to you with the microphone. Okay.
Okay. My name is Jenny Goncher. I go to the University of Missouri in Columbia, Missouri. My question, if I can get it out. As a college Republican at Missouri's campus, we're making headway, I think, and I think we're starting to make headway with many of the black students as well. And I think one of the reasons I've been able to do some of those things is because I have a lot of black friends that I just had from high school and came with me from school, and so we stayed friends. They knew me before I was a college Republican, basically. We don't have very great relations with the Legion of Black Collegians on the campus. Do you have any suggestions for how to smooth out those relations, make them better, show them that we're not crazy, evil people?
Well, so in some ways, there's almost nothing you can do. I mean, I've said that about President Bush. He could, he can do what Clinton did in Martha's Vineyard. He was parading up in Martha's Vineyard a few years ago with an afro on and jive talking, and the media suppressed that photo. They wouldn't let that get out. It was the same week they released the photo of Christine Whitman patting down a black suspect. But other things you can do is to find out about the history of the things that I talked about, and have meetings with them and show them, hey, look at what the history of the Republican Party is, and show them exactly who was on the other side. And it's a cross-section of issues, especially when you're talking about the pro-life issue. That's something that's starting to catch on thanks to the hard work of people like Reverend Johnny Hunter, Doug and Connie Eller in St. Louis. That the abortion movement was started, Planned Parenthood, it was started to annihilate the black population in America. That's what Margaret Sanger's whole program was about. You know, genocide is a big catchword in the black community. You talk about the Tuskegee experiment and things like that. Genocide is a big word. Well, that's what abortion is. I mentioned earlier that the Hispanic population has passed us in our numbers in America. Part of the reason for that is that over a third of all abortions in America, now black women are, I think, 7% of the population, but over a third of all abortions in America since Roe v. Wade have been performed on black women. That's staggering. We have self-annihilated our way out of being the #1 minority, and that has very big implications into the future. Gun control is another issue. See, these are issues you won't see brought up in front of black audiences. Gun control is another issue. The first gun control laws in this country were passed against blacks by Democrats because it was well understood, and Lysander Spooner, who was one of those radicals I talked about before, abolitionist, he said that and he was right, if a man is armed, he cannot be oppressed. They well understood that brother's not going to just let you hang him if he's got a gun in his hand. He's going to not, he's going to bust caps in the modern vernacular. The education issue is probably #1 in the forefront of the mind of especially poor black parents. They see what's going on in these government schools. They don't like it. They care just as much about their kids as rich people do. And yet, when the court fight is happening, they look across the aisle and they see the NAACP and others on the opposite side of them, just as they were during the busing issue. The parents didn't want busing, the black leadership wanted it, and they got their way, and we see the consequences. So, dialogue, and let them know that, hey, you're on their side. People want to know that you care, as they say. Democrats are good at that. They fake sincerity better than anybody I've seen, but they're there. And Republicans have to get more involved at the grassroots. I have an advantage in some ways because, as I say, I'm from the streets. I'm not from the streets per se. Okay, I'm from the streets, but I'm not of the streets, I should say. But talk to them in a way that they understand. Talk about things that they understand. I remember the first speech I ever gave for the foundation was called Why Puff Daddy is a Capitalist. Now it would be Why P. Diddy is a Capitalist. But talk to them about the things that they understand. Look into the history. Look at all the great inventors and bring these things up to them and say, wait a minute, if they could do this at that time, in much tougher circumstances than we face now, then why can't we now? Thank you. My pleasure.
My name is David Sloan from Old Dominion University.
Which one?
Old Dominion University. Okay, my question is, certainly I believe this is a despicable word, so the N-word. So why do these rappers use it so freely?
The question he's asking is the N-word. Why do rappers use it so frequently? Again, it goes to what I said before. Once you have been cloaked in inferiority, anything you do, nobody should question it. That's the way they look at it. It's a very negative word. It's a very negative connotations to it. You think of what our foreparents had to endure under that. They would never use it. In fact, I remember it was last year or the year before, J-Lo used it in one of her records. I think it was a record she did with Ja Rule. And she talked about my niggas. And where was the great controversy? There was none, because they said, well, you have to understand, she's from the South Bronx and this, that, and other thing. But she was also down with P. Diddy at that time. But she pimped the ghetto. And now she's with Ben Affleck. And people were seeing right through it, which is why she had to do that song, I'm Still Jenny from the Block. Yeah, right. And in fact, in California, there was the lieutenant governor referred to a group of black, I think they were carpenters or something like that, as niggers. What's his name? Clinton's boy at the DNC. McAuliffe. When after Clinton shafted Maynard Jackson out of the leadership of the DNC, and he got the nerve to go to the funeral and say, I loved Maynard Jackson. I loved him. And they shafted him because they wanted McAuliffe in. McAuliffe then, in his thank you address, thanks the coloreds in the audience. No controversy. It wasn't even a one-day story. It says all depends on who's using the word. Eminem better not say it. So he's down, he's almost black, he's just about there. But he better not say it. It's the double standard. No one should use that word. period. Somebody put, hey, my nigga, no, I'm not. One of my bishops said, talked about the use of the word dog even. That's my dog. However you feel about dogs, and I hope my niece might be watching. I don't particularly hate dogs, sweetheart. But, they'll go anywhere. They're not really the cleanest animals. Words mean things. Rush Limbaugh always said that. Words mean things. Words are very powerful. And it's not something I accept. I think it was a comedian who worked for Richard Pryor, and I can't remember his name, Paul something, I think. And he was talking about, the word has power and this. No, there's no good use for that word. None. It's about a double standard. Robert Byrd. What kind of name is that for a Klansman? Robert Byrd. These are like 4 first names, but Robert Byrd goes on Fox and says he knows white niggers too. Nothing. Nothing happens to this guy. It's a double standard, plain and simple. Thank you. I'm sorry, this is going to have to be the last question. I'm running into someone else's time. You really want to hear this, gentlemen. I'll answer your questions either at the both sessions or later on.
Okay, I actually had 2 questions for you, but in the interest of time, I'll only ask you one.
Right.
First of all, let's talk about Robert Byrd again. We know that he was a KKK recruiter, and he says he doesn't have any memory of any of the activities he was involved in. Mm-hmm. But what do we know about the activities of the Klansmen he recruited? Because if we can find that out, if any of them were tied to lynchings, he'd be an accessory to hate crime.
Exactly. My friends at Project 21, I think one was Kevin Martin. They asked that question of, I think it was his chief of staff or someone like that. They couldn't answer the question. And that's something that I think we have a right to know. If President Bush has had a brother, let's say, or a relative, he could be a 16th cousin, and he was involved in the Klan, we would know it. We would know everything there is to know about it. If there was a surveillance tape of Neil Bush referring to a brother as nigger 30 times, it would have been on CNN, BET, VH1, the Cartoon Channel. It would have been all over the place. It's a double standard. They don't really particularly care about the lives of black people. They've proven it. Castro's slaughtering them, and they don't care. 80% of the, now they talk about here in America, what is President Bush going to do about the prison population being 70% black? It's 80% in Cuba. What are we going to do about it? It's a total double standard. I think we have a right to know whether a man who was the leader of the Senate for 12 years and president pro tem of the Senate and could be again, next in line for the White House, whether or not he was involved in the lynchings of blacks or civil rights workers or anyone else, or cross burnings or anything of that nature. We have a right to know that if he's going to be a public figure. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Reggie. I'm guessing that's the first time the term "pimp the ghetto" has been used at a Young America's Foundation conference. All right, we're going to take another quick break, about 5 minutes, and then come back in for Warrior.
Next, another speech from today's Conservative Student Conference by the former professional wrestler known as Warrior. This is an hour, starting with an introduction and short video presentation.
"13 years ago, I saw an event which blew my young mind. It was the defeat of my hero, Hulk Hogan, at the hands of the Ultimate Warrior at WrestleMania 6. This is one of the biggest nights in the history of wrestling, a champion versus champion match that the whole world had been waiting to see this. As an 8-year-old wrestling fan, I didn't know anything about the man behind the face paint. I just knew I wasn't very happy with him. As a 20-year-old CPAC attendee, I learned a great many things. I learned about a man who has strong convictions. Warrior is the only wrestler ever to have worked with Vince McMahon to retain the rights to his character's name. Warrior steadfastly believed in his right to the creation of his intellect. Warrior is a man who has spent many hours of his time studying the great thinkers of Western civilization. Thinkers like Aristotle, Thomas Aquinas, Adam Smith, Russell Kirk, Friedrich Hayek, Milton Friedman, Ayn Rand, and many more. He has used the knowledge to formulate his own views and is now seeking to bring them to college students around the world through our lecture series. And now, since I will never get this chance again, hailing from parts unknown, Warrior.
What's your name? Man, the ultimate warrior. Show 'em muscle, man. Show 'em.
Everything you have lived to take over.
we both believe in two places. It shall never happen. So let us not be impatient, for only desperate men act with impatience.
Thank you. Get a drink of water. You can cut the music, I think. You can cut the music. Well, you'd think after 13 years, after I beat up Hulk Hogan, he would get over it, that kid. Can you all hear me? Hello. And thank you for having me. I'm honored to be here at your national conference. And I want to begin by thanking Young America's Foundation, Ron Robinson, sorry about that. Ron Robinson and all its staff, Melissa for working so hard to pull this event off, and especially, as I usually do, Mr. Patrick Coyle. Patrick was brave enough, or bold enough as the case may be, to be the first one to give me an opportunity to speak to young activists like yourself. That was at CPAC 2003. And out of that opportunity, I've been able to go out to other college campuses, speak to other activists, and let me tell you that it's been awesomely inspiring. This week, you are going to be exposed to incredible conservative knowledge you will take back to your campuses in preparation for the activism you will do this coming fall and throughout the rest of the school year. On a personal note, aside from the conservative knowledge, enlightenment that I'm going to provide to you during my speech today, I want you to take back with you the pride you should have in being proud of yourselves for being involved, being here this week, being concerned, thinking about what's going on in the world around you. I'd like you to all give a hand to yourself right now before we even get started. And don't take that praise lightly. Accept it in its right light, because I know a little bit about inspiring and motivating people. I've been very self-motivated throughout my entire life. I built an incredible career on inspiring, motivating, and energizing people. So you'd be showing me disrespect if you didn't take it in the way that I'm giving it to you. Probably the most affectionate accolade that I can give is that it has been just as rewarding for me to go out on college campuses and speak to 200 to 300 college students as it was to perform in front of 20,000 people a night in arenas and coliseums throughout the world. That's truly how much it means to me. I want to take a second to thank C-SPAN for being here. I told my wife a couple months ago that I was going to make a personal appeal to Brian Lamb. Brian Lamb grew up in Lafayette, Indiana. I grew up exactly 26 miles from there in a town called Crawfordsville, Indiana, and my grandmother lived in Lafayette, Indiana her entire life. I never got around to doing it, but they showed up anyway. And I need to take one more second to say hello to my beautiful wife, Dana, and my two beautiful children, Indiana and Madigan Twain. I didn't find out till Friday that this was going to be taped live. And the main reason why I have to do that is because I don't want to catch a stink from my 2.5-year-old daughter, Indiana. You see, she is very familiar with the conservative movement already. In fact, she can spot a liberal at 100 yards. And she tells me, "Stinky liberal, Daddy." That's great. It has been a part of my thinking since I've gone out on the college campuses that I need to spend enough time to give ample background information, sort of explain who I am, what I'm about, how I came to be a conservative, how I came to go out and be a conservative activist. But what I'd like to do today, because of this special opportunity to speak to so many who are seriously dedicated at this special annual event, is I'd like to give an abbreviated version of my life history and get right into knocking around some serious ideas. The short story on having had that career you watched on the video is, I used to do that, I don't anymore. When the business became depraved and degenerate creatively, I decided that I was not going to be able to find it in myself to rationalize childish and perverted behavior by claiming I was just an actor acting. Growing up being one of my life tenets, that when we do grow up, we should think and act like it. Thank you, though, for your patience and good humor in watching it. I know among such an esteemed group of learned individuals, it would be rare to find your own television stations tuned to it, right? Anyway, I'll be around all week. I know we have a bowl session this evening. You're going to have to help me out with that. I'm not sure exactly what that is, but feel free to ask me any personal and professional questions that you would like. And I hope that you will enjoy getting to know me as much as I know I'm going to enjoy getting to know you. Let me start with, my name is Warrior. That is not a nickname cheaply lifted from having had my sports entertainment career. It is my full legal name. It is the surname of my family, and it means something very special, serious, and important to me, and signifies the assertive, principled, and proud, and oftentimes feisty conservative philosophy of life I live by. You'll recognize that as we move along. To skip a lot of history, let me just go back about 10 years. About 10 years ago, I took my first break from my sports entertainment career in the middle of its success. And I realized when I took it, it wasn't that I was just taking a break from my sports entertainment career. It was the first time in my life, 32, 33, 34, where I was taking a break from being in pursuit of a goal. Since I was in high school and happened to stumble into the weight room one day and got launched upon this incredible journey of self-discipline, and shortly thereafter, a few weeks, 3 or 4 weeks, when I saw the changes I alone controlled in my scrawny little pathetic physique, I knew that I could make changes in my life in other ways, so I boldly said, I'm going to better my life through education. And I set my sights on pursuing a Doctor of Chiropractic degree. So from that time, when I was in high school, up until the time I took that break about 10 years ago, I was constantly in pursuit of a goal. I was around people that were goal-oriented, goal-minded. I was in environments that were like that too. From those times, I constantly was busy all the time, focusing and concentrating on succeeding at life. Really, better said, concentrating and focusing on finding out what success was all about, because we really don't get taught that. We have to find out for ourselves. Out of that, probably about 3 or 4 months after I started my break, thinking I was going to take a much longer break, I said, look, I better get busy with doing something because I'm really bored. So I got involved in some entrepreneurial projects. One of those was a natural for me, owning a health club. I operated this health club hands-on, was there, customer service, doing all the things, trying to emphasize that the quality of your life can be improved through exercise. Being able to communicate with regular people that were working 9 to 5, had families, that were out there trying to make ends meet, was my first real opportunity to interact with people on a regular basis, get to know my neighbors, find out about their philosophies of life, hear and see how they thought about, success, parenting, relationships, education, politics, thinking, and problem solving. And I got to tell you, it was a real eye-opener for me. There are 2 dramatic things I found out. One was that most people don't have any serious thinking that they're doing, and 2, most people operate their lives by their feelings. The second thing was, as a guy who was always pursuing the highest degree of success in my own goals, I thought that everybody had the same extreme desire and passion to exceed at their own goals, no matter what their profession was. I very quickly found out I was wrong about that. Most of those I interacted with felt, without any logical explanation, that success was more dependent in stepping into it or having somebody hand it to them. Enviously, they regularly bashed wealth and success, even bashed the owners of the businesses that provided them their own jobs. They were constantly devising ways to get out of work and still get paid for it, and with a straight face, believing they were owed it. Many cynically blamed the condition of society for their failures, some of them even going so far as to blame their failed personal relationships on society, as if society hadn't done enough to raise them up the ladder. They did not believe that hard work, consistency, perseverance, striving to be best at what you did, doing what you love to do, they did not believe that any of those were the keys to being successful at life. They also believed that their choices made by their own free will had little to do with where they were in their lives, their places, or their circumstances. They used feelings more than thinking to make their decisions, although if you asked them, they would say no, adding insult to injury. Most of them believed having success was associated with having money and material possessions, and being able to live degenerately or corruptly without accountability. It was very clear to me these people and I had two distinctly divergent philosophies of life. Mine was built on a solid foundation of thinking and self-reliance. Theirs was built, unfortunately, as are too many others, was built on an unstable foundation of feelings and dependency. Of course, on many of these occasions, interacting with these adults, political terms would come up, but I was ignorant about politics at the time. Even after all the taxes I paid, I didn't know nothing about it. I never had any exposure enough to want me to pay attention, yet by contextual clues, I put two and two together and deduced that government or politics must have something to do with their dour life attitudes and their disconnected, illogical thinking. Because of this, I deepened my interest in what was going on in culture and politics. And I kept hearing how liberalism was an assault on Western civilization, Western culture, and Western education and enlightenment. Out of that curiosity, I crossed paths with the great books of the Western world. The great books are a collection of writings by civilization's first recorded thinkers, mankind's greatest original seekers of knowledge. In those books, I found what inspired me to steer the exact levels of energy and intensity I put into my physical pursuits to succeed in sports entertainment into intellectual pursuits. In addition, I became very fond of American history, especially the uplifting and empowering nature of the founding of this country. Again, as a guy who has professional experience portraying a hero of sorts to young minds, let me tell you that the ultimate warrior and every other human being considered a hero, fiction or nonfiction, takes a back seat to the founding people of this country. They made and broke the mold. They are the absolute heroes and should be for every American citizen. That they are not is a tragedy beyond measure. I'm not embarrassed to tell you, through the learning I've done on American history, I've discovered many things, not the least of which two of them are shame and anger. My own shame about my at one time pathetic lack of knowledge of what the idea America meant, and my anger that America, its virtues, and the human virtues that went into creating it were not mentored to me with the discipline, reverence, and respect they deserved. At a point of about 2 or 3 years into this self-learning journey, I was having this intellectual debate with myself, using my great book knowledge, using my studies of American history, and what I was hearing from contemporary intellectualism on political and conservative issues that I was paying more attention to. And I got madder than hell about the deterioration of education in this country and the subsequent deterioration of this country overall. And I said, I got to pick up my guns and I got to get into the fight. All of it was becoming more clear to me, and with perfect timing, the woman who would become my wife walked into my life. She was conservative, and through her I realized I had been, without knowing directly, all along living by a conservative philosophy of life. I say philosophy because there is a distinction between conservative philosophy and conservative politics. Finding out and understanding I've been living by a conservative philosophy of life also, of course, opened my eyes and mind to exactly what liberalism was, and that all these people I'd been perplexed by were indeed liberals. The whining and complaining, the contradictory thinking and hope of no repercussions, the expectation that they could depend on someone to provide them not only with their sustenance for life, but the meaning of life, quality of outcome, and happiness altogether. To be blunt, I have to tell you, as a guy who spent a great part of his life building up his muscles and often being mischaracterized as a big, dumb, muscle-headed wrestler, I'm bothered and concerned, sometimes even frightened by the lack of thinking and level of irresponsibility going on in our world, especially right here within our own borders. I made a lot of effort, but in the end, I realized it is not a simple, innocuous disparity between the philosophies of conservatism and liberalism. With even more bluntness, let me say it as it is. One philosophy is about life, the other is about death. Now I see some eyes rolling, and you may think that may be a little too radical, too extreme, a little too recent Michael Savage. But let me tell you, as a father charged with the responsibility of protecting my children from the dangers of the world and concerned for the safety and security of their own futures, I do not want my children growing up in a world run by liberalism as it exists today. Not a day passes for any of us when something uttered from a liberal's mouth doesn't make our own jaws drop and hit the floor in disbelief. I'm going to go into this in greater detail, but the short answer is life doesn't work the way liberals want it to. Instead, their view of life will ultimately lead to the end of civilization. I mean, just ask the question, what is society made up of? It's individuals, it's citizens. Our societal freedoms are only as good as its citizens practice self-restraint, decency, and law and order. Liberals have pushed the provocative envelope of human degeneracy, lawlessness, and disorder to the point that the envelope is disgracefully inside out. They scream intolerance to protect only those who are criminal or insane. They are moving our society closer and closer to an outright anarchy, completely ignorant that whether they like it or not, there will always be rules. Anarchy is but a prelude to tyranny. By liberals' kind of rules, their kind of rulers, as we can know from history, are called dictators and despots, or more fashionably by MTV standards today, thugs and gangbangers. Who in here has not envisioned, along with, of course, keeping up all your conservative optimism, that if liberalism gets away, keeps getting away with what it is, future generations will indeed manifest such rank, chaotic grossness. Liberals are chasing away the last vestiges of virtue and honor from our society, and as John Adams said, enduring liberty is the child of virtue. Thus, the society liberalism is creating is one depleted of virtue and devoid of liberty. Ideas having consequences. The consequence of tolerantly engaging ideas that have wrong, false, and evil consequences is simply destroying everything that is decent, civil, virtuous, and objective about the society we live in. That frightens me at first. Then it raises the hair on my neck, because the future picture of the deteriorated condition of this country, if liberalism, as we know it today, has its way with it, is like tossing my kids and grandkids into the fires of hell. And as long as I have the strength, I will sustain the fury to fight and work to have liberalism broken down and made impotent. Now, I'm just a guy throughout his life who has practiced a great deal of common sense, stuck with the basics. So when I wanted to find out even more about what conservatism was distinctly, what the differences were between conservatism and liberalism, I stuck with the basics. I came to some common sense conclusions. I'm here to share those with you. I found out that that conservative philosophy of life I was living by before I even knew what to call it has always been common sense since the creation of this country's founding documents. I didn't have to be, and I don't have to be now a scholar to know that. In fact, the most impressionable enlightenment about the founding documents, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, the Federalist Papers, and all the ancillary communication between the founding fathers themselves, all of it put before the founding people is that all these writings were written then in language to be understood by the common sense of the people. And yet it is uncommon to find anybody with sense enough at all able to understand them today. They were never written to be instruments. They were never written as instruments to be understood only by people with law degrees or some other sort of cryptic education. What lies therein is our conservative philosophy, America's philosophy. And if a conservative doesn't get that or have the desire to get that, then neither will common sense appeal to them. And believe me, it is common sense in its traditional sense that is the core of conservatism. The founders knew this. Ronald Reagan, one of this country's greatest modern presidents, knew this as well. So let me be serious. There's a war going on in this country. In every war, the battle leaving the greatest impression and having the greatest impact is the fundamental battle for and over the ideas. In this war, there's essentially one idea at stake. That one single idea is America. The greatest idea mankind has ever known, created by some of the greatest men, accepted and seconded by some of the greatest people who ever walked the face of this earth. Although in this country there are political identities on the fringe, the major combatants in this war are conservatism and liberalism, each one fighting to be the one driving America by their respective philosophy. I mean, let's be clear. It's vitally important to recognize here, conservatism's and liberalism's political ideas are not mechanisms of creating America. They are simply mechanisms of interpretation. The founding documents already define the idea that is America. Those documents defining America are not amorphous discombobulations of opinions that found their meaning by happenstance or mistake. It is easy for others who are not paying attention to mistake. I think that the idea America has always been a rough draft, still after all these years under construction. What America is, it has been for over 227 years. At its core, it is to be left unchanged. Our republic form of government is already, again, as it is defined by the founding times in those documents, taking into account all of our earnest desires to better the world, contribute beneficially to its condition, and that we are 227 years removed from the founding of this country, 215 years removed from the signing of this country's Constitution. It's important toward that beneficent contribution we who call ourselves conservatives want to make, that we frequently return to our roots, reanalyze and re-enlighten ourselves to the fact that there is a difference between conservative philosophy and conservative politics. We need to take the time to look back, in effect, to ask, then remind ourselves, from where do we come? Our conservative philosophy of life is conservatism's greatest attribute and weapon to use in the war battling over the idea of America. We need to understand that and never forget it. Ayn Rand, a brilliant woman who was ignorant and stupid when it came to her atheism, said this about philosophy. As a human being, you have no choice about the fact you need a philosophy. Your only choice is whether you define your philosophy by a conscious, rational, disciplined process of thought and scrupulously logical deliberation, or let your subconscious accumulate a junk heap of unwarranted conclusions, false generalizations, undefined contradictions, undigested slogans, unidentified wishes, doubts, and fears, thrown together by chance but integrated into your subconscious into a kind of mongrel philosophy, fused into a single solid weight of self-doubt, like a ball and chain in the place where your mind's wings should have grown. Philosophy is not just an abstract, high and mighty idea created by degreed philosophers, only to intentionally confuse the rest of us human beings, make us think that philosophical concepts are over our head. Born, we live by a philosophy of life, and come to ask during our life, what is life? What does my life have to do with what this existence is? What is the chief end of man, as Abigail Adams wondered? A question she thought, quote, every rational being, unquote, should explore. Your philosophy is your comprehensive view of life and the world around you, your view of whether or not you are capable of dealing with it, interacting with the world around you effectively, and how you come to know whether you are or not. Whatever your view is determines how you think and act within it. Government, the politics of it, doesn't mean anything without its people, the human beings who comprise it. It doesn't mean anything to the trees and the dogs who find fun in lifting their legs on them. And government won't work unless its people do. Not as in work 9 to 5 or as in remain regularly employed. Yes, that's part of it. But work in the sense that people operate their lives by an effective philosophy of life. Let's not kid ourselves. Not only do a wild majority of our fellow members of society operate their lives by a junk heap of unwarranted conclusions, et cetera, a kind of mongrel philosophy fused into a single solid weight of self-doubt, many of even our own conservative representatives don't live by or practice what is by definition a conservative philosophy of life. Many conservatives lack a conservative soul. There are many minor and major clues that reveal this. Each of us here could add to the list. We don't have the time. Two of the most blatant politically might be that, one, our republic government is just that. It is correctly called a democracy, it is correctly called a republic, not a democracy, and rarely is it properly called that. And two, our Republican form of government was not designed to become a place where its elected representatives would seek and find lifetime employment. The first answer our Republic representatives should give us to a question we, the people, should not even have to ask is, my prime goal is to shrink government to enlarge individual freedom. Say it like Barry Goldwater without chagrin did. I have little interest in streamlining government or making it more efficient, for I mean to reduce its size. I do not undertake to promote welfare, for I propose to extend freedom. My aim is not to pass laws, but to repeal them. It is not to inaugurate new programs, but to cancel old ones that do violence to the Constitution or that have failed their purpose, or that impose on the people an unwarranted financial burden. I will not attempt to discover whether legislation is needed before I have first determined whether it is constitutionally permissible. And if I should later be attacked for neglecting my constituents' interest, I shall reply that I was informed that their main interest is liberty, and that in that cause I am doing the very best I can. Where are the bloody, red meat-eating conservative politicians cut of a mold like our first commander-in-chief when he said, government is not reason, it is not eloquence, it is force. Like fire, it is a dangerous servant and a fearful master. Politicians today, for a large part, unfortunately, are nasty, self-serving, sycophantic sellouts with jelly spines and mush minds. The main business of a politician, as Edmund Burke, seen as many as the father of conservatism, is still further to contract the narrowness of men's ideas, to confirm inveterate prejudices, to inflame vulgar passions, and to abet all sorts of popular absurdities. Not all, no, but sadly we live in such unprincipled times where it is easier to label them collectively than to discern who the few are who are not. Yet, that they are, regrettably, the way they are, has more to do, much more to do, with what they don't understand or outright ignore about the Declaration of Independence philosophically than it does with their incompetence or cowardice politically. All the conservative political ideas, lower taxes, limited government, pro-life, capitalism, strong defense, right to bear arms, and the conservative-minded liberties, freedoms, and securities that conservatives want to run through all these are not concepts pulled out of thin air. They sit atop a hierarchical mass of knowledge and a philosophical base that supports them. The integrity, substance, and potential viability of any of these bigger political conservative ideas are only as good as the stability and strength of our philosophical base. And I would add, each conservative individual contributes to the stability and strength of that philosophical base only to the degree equal to the strength or weakness which he lives by a conservative philosophy of life. This country's philosophy precedes what it is politically. The Declaration of Independence is America's philosophical statement. The Constitution is America's political statement. Conservatism wants to preserve both of these, but we start with understanding and practicing the philosophy. The founders of this country knew full well that practical government application of sustaining our constitutional declaration, i.e., a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, sustaining that was only achievable if each person understood the philosophical context of our Declaration of Independence, i.e., we find these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That philosophical context was conservative then, as it has always meant. To live by a conservative philosophy of life means to favor traditional views and values and institutions, and that you have a want to conserve these traditional things, to prevent the decay, the waste, the injury to them. You want to keep them alive, continue their existence. Traditional means the modes of thought and behavior followed by a people continuously from generation to generation. Traditional does not mean, as liberalism would have the world believe, antiquated, out of style, outdated. It means simply what people have used that has worked. Certainly we can agree it is not what has not worked that people have used continuously throughout the generations. You don't keep beating your head up against the wall, doing those things that do not work, do not have effective advancing outcomes. Neither have people throughout the ages. Conservatism, conserving tradition, is nothing new. And conservatism, as Russell Kirk told us, cannot exist anywhere without reverence for dead generations. Thomas Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence claiming himself that the founders and he were in exceptional ways bringing forth nothing new. In his own words, it was not the object of the Declaration of Independence with respect to our rights to find out new principles or new arguments never before thought of, not merely to say things which had never been said before, but to place before mankind the common sense of the subject in terms so plain and firm as to command their assent and justify ourselves in the independent stand we were compelled to take, neither aiming at originality of principle or sentiment, nor yet copying from any particular and previous writing. It was intended to be an expression of the American mind and to give that expression the proper tone and spirit called for by the occasion. All its authority rests then on the harmonizing sentiments of the day, whether expressed in conversation, in letters, printed essays, or in elementary books of public right, as Aristotle, Cicero, Locke, Sidney, etc. The founders were not attempting to justify a revolution on principles with which the audience, the citizenry, was unfamiliar. The idea of a natural rights political philosophy had been brewing and evolving since the first governing of man. The founders were creating nothing new out of whole cloth. They were simply acting as original conservatives, conservators of historical tradition, taking from a knowledgeable record of thousands of years of mankind's evolution exactly why a classic great book's education is necessary. Therein, the Declaration of Independence's philosophical statement lie not only our justification to preserve what is traditionally political, but therein lie the founders' pleas to succeeding generations are entrusted to preserve the immemorial traditions of all time. And if these things are not preserved, as the founders' caveats warned us, laced through all their prescient writings, it is not just our Republican form of government that is at stake. It is the existence of all mankind. This is what is at stake. And its destiny today is in our hands, your hands, was in our preceding generation's hands. Tomorrow will be in our succeeding generation's hands. Don't fool yourselves that it is not. It will be your future family's survival at stake. If not in terms of vital signs, then in terms of quality of life. If you plan on having kids, bringing kids into the world, think about it. Look around us. and see the half-life expiration-like deterioration of this country's traditions in just the last 100, 80, 40, 20, 10 years. There's an eerie irony whenever I ask a parent who's not paying attention to what's going on in D.C. with their government if they want the best for their kid. Their answer is always yes. My follow-up question is, always, are you sure? Because as much as parents want to believe they are protecting their children in their own backyards, what is going on in the backyard of our government is a horror story. No parent who truly wants the best for their family would knowingly subject their children to. Abraham Lincoln said the philosophy of the schoolroom in one generation will be the philosophy of the government in the next. Only an idiot who does not belong on the street with those of us who are sane cannot see the grave degradation of damage done over just the last few generations. Make no mistake, the original conservators were telling us loud and clear, we are not only charged with preserving traditions since the founding of this country, we are charged with preserving the traditions since the beginning of time. Exactly and truly what conservatism most fundamentally is. Conservative philosophy being about preserving what's traditional, traditional being about what has worked, it is interesting to point out, while we are now preoccupied battling culturally and politically in these modern times, that the two most vintage fundamental traditions the majority of people have followed continuously throughout the ages just so happen to underscore the one thing of conservatism most assaulted by liberalism and highlight the one plain difference between conservatism and liberalism as the two are defined ideologically today. The one thing most assaulted about our conservatism is our belief in a creator. And the one thing, the one plain difference between conservatism and liberalism is thinking versus feeling, using one over the other to conduct human life and society at large. Think about it. Since the beginning of time, man has traditionally recognized there is creation. There is nothing more traditional. Creation demands that there be a creator. It and he are the primary traditions. And the most traditional thing about man alone is he thinks. He is always thinking. It is the tradition of man who has acted on his thinking that has advanced and improved mankind, not man who has acted on his feelings. Those who think make the world work, not those who feel. The fathers who founded this country declared what mankind had again for thousands of years been striving toward. To see, know, and recognize the Creator's existence is self-evident truth, one outside debate or denial. That man is endowed with incredible gifts and unalienable rights. That government must be the servant, man the master. That man is its creator. Government is not found in people created. America was founded on the understanding and acceptance of these two philosophical traditions, a country genuflecting to the first tradition, creation and its creator, a country bowing to the second tradition, the unlimited potential of the thinking free man. This is, in its most naked, pristine definition, the American philosophy of life, a philosophy conservatism wants to preserve and a philosophy liberalism wants to destroy. How many of you believe in destiny? You can participate. Raise your hands if you believe in destiny. I'm asking you. The rest of you don't? You don't. Okay. What about the other? Are the people that didn't raise their hand that believe in destiny? How many of you believe the lives of the founders is prophetic? Just a few? And the rest of you call yourselves conservatives? I'm serious. How many of you believe the deaths of Thomas Jefferson and John Adams, 50 years to the day of our officially recognized independence, is divinely inspired? If you can raise your hand, raise it. How many of you believe, as George Washington stated in his first inaugural address, no people can be bound to acknowledge and adore the invisible hand which conducts the affairs of men more than those of the United States? Every step by which they have advanced to the character of an independent nature seems to have been distinguished by some token of providential agency. How many people believe that? How many of you believe, as Tocqueville said about America's first immigrants, the scattering of a seed of a great people which God, with his own hands, is planting on a predestined shore. How many people in here believe that? How many of you believe what John Adams believed? America was designed by the providence for the theater, on which man was to make his true figure, on which science, virtue, liberty, happiness, and glory were to exist in peace. That America is settled with reverence and wonder as the opening of a grand scheme and design and providence for the illumination of the ignorant all over the earth. How many people believe that? How many of you believe America truly is God's country? Then you believe, as I believe, every conservative needs to believe. Thomas Jefferson penned the Declaration of Independence, and history recognizes James Madison as our father of the Constitution. And we were mindful of how all other founding people contributed. But it was the Creator himself speaking through them to us, to all of mankind. In traditional conservative fashion, it is indisputable. The Creator set mankind on a course for America since the beginning of man's time. Century after century, decade after decade, of trial and error between man and the world he was created into. And in the 18th century, he was ready to undertake, as John Winthrop, the first governor of Massachusetts, was first to famously declare, ready to undertake the building up of a city up on a hill, which Ronald Reagan, just over 200 years later, the glorious general that he was, upgraded to a shining city on a hill. With that in mind, we must pause and ask ourselves, just how deeply do we believe? For if we truly believe in destiny, then we as conservatives cannot believe in coincidence. It is no coincidence that thinking human beings brought mankind's evolution up into a time where profound thinking human beings were able to construct the Declaration of Independence, declaring the sovereignty of the human being's earthly supremacy. From its farthest point back in man's record of time, it has never been those who set the lowest unthinking goals that advanced humanity. Since the days of the caveman, it wasn't the one who sat inside their shadows full of fear and feelings who brought man out of the dark caves into the light of man's future. It was the one who faced down fear and figured things out, primitively as he could even then. The history of freedom has been the history of courage and intelligence. It is no coincidence that the founders were virtuous, moral men who left us volumes and volumes, chapters and chapters, words and words of wise admonitions, counseling us that our Republican form of government was anchored on ballast, virtuous and moral, both public and private. Throughout all the written correspondence between the founders and within the writings put before the people toward the debate of what kind of government they would have, there is abundant and explicit observation and intimation advising the kind of character, integrity, devotion, and honor its people must have to sustain their republic. From its farthest point back in man's record of time, it has not been those absent character or those who harbored ignoble thoughts or those who practiced base acts that have advanced humanity. Vice, immorality, ignorance, irreverence, stupidity, dishonesty, disrespect, ill repute, illogic have not brought us to the legitimate place where we find ourselves today. It is no coincidence that the phrases laws of nature and of nature's God, and by their creator, and appealing to the supreme judge of the world, and with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, exist in the Declaration of Independence. Sublime is creator-given. Man could never have set the highest goal for himself or humanity if it were not the highest ideal to begin with. It has always been his traditional belief that he is created in the eyes and the image of the Creator that has acted as his impetus to set and shoot for the highest goals, strive to be the best he can. This country's governmental philosophy is creator-based. It is uniquely American. No other people in history have ever made this traditional principle the basis of their governmental philosophy. To forget this truth is heinous offense against the spirit of traditional America. The Creator and man thinking are two parts of what Russell Kirk called the permanent things. America's continued existence, like mankind's continued existence throughout the ages, has always depended on these two traditions. Traditions conservative-minded people have always sustained and preserved. James Madison said, before any man can be considered as a member of civil society, he must be considered as a subject of the governor of the universe. And is it not true? Mind is the measure of man as a creation. It is no coincidence that the Declaration of Independence declaring the human being's unalienable rights also demands a responsibility that too is just as unalienable. It cannot be transferred or repudiated. The Declaration of Independence points out how great we are as human beings, yes, but also clearly elucidates that the human being is fully capable of comprehending what is inescapably expected from him in return. Protection of one's unalienable rights without the assumption of self-responsibility is absurd. It is no coincidence. Benjamin Franklin famously remarked, "A republic if you can keep it," and that to keep the republic, people of it must live up to their end of the deal. It is no coincidence we exist in a world of omnipresent alternatives and are created a being of free will, capable of choosing between good and evil, right and wrong, true and false. Existence is not by our design. We were not consultants devising the rules we have to live by. Knowledge of good and evil is the best fruit of the tree of knowledge. Let each one of us leave every other kind of knowledge, Socrates says at the end of the Republic, and seek and follow one thing only, to learn and discern between good and evil. With that in mind, I say to you with the utmost gravity, neither, my fellow conservatives, is it a coincidence that the thing most assaulted of our conservatism by liberalism is our belief in a creator, nor is it a coincidence that the fundamental difference between conservatism and liberalism is thinking versus feeling. Shame on us if we are fooled into thinking that it is nothing more than a harmless, silly coincidence. We are endowed with gifts to see it for what it is, judge it for what it is, and endowed with gifts to fight against its harmful, destructive intentions and invasions on all that is traditional. And we need to. We need to do it now, and we need to do it in our lives. We should be ashamed that we are, truth be told, many times doing more to befriend a burden we will inevitably transfer to the future generations of the very ones we love than we are doing to dissolve it altogether. Liberalism, although at one time meaning man created freedom for himself by using his mind and thinking to better his life, is today at its basest, most despicable bottom line, a calculated, sophistic, and baneful assault on life as conservatism knows it, an all-out assault on the Creator and man's ability to think and provide for himself. Freedom means nothing to those who have no desire or intention to use it. Liberalism is breeding armies of hammerheads who will never need it. Success for liberalism is dependent on failure and doom and gloom. It is not liberalism's intent to win, positively achieve, positively construct anything for any of the people of America, for that matter, any of the people of the world. It is only their intent to win for liberalism as a cause. To have its cause prevail as another ism in a long line of other historically failed isms, Marxism, communism, socialism, Stalinism. Even everything liberalism has ever done with the intent of doing good, as liberalism puts it, has turned into something nastier than hell. Truth be told, the only thing ever created by liberalism is the road paved to hell with good intentions. There are no promising forks in the road on any road liberals travel ever. It is not common knowledge. Liberals believe in a utopian society where everything is equal. Nobody is or has less than anybody else, and we all have equal quantities of everything top to bottom. Life doesn't work that way. It's a good-for-nothing joke to think that it can, and an oppressive evil fraud to then try to pursue it as a goal. Like a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. A societal liberal leveling will make our society only as good as its least critical, laziest, most timid, least educated, least motivated, most beggarly, and most insipidly inspired among us. A conservative should not have to ask a fellow conservative what his response is to that. It better be, especially when you're talking to me. I don't want to live in a world like that. To hear them tell it the failed isms of days gone by have failed simply because people didn't try hard enough, didn't sacrifice enough, didn't care enough, didn't have large enough coffers to play out the experiment to its utopian end. I'm not sorry to tell you, I don't get that. People tried so hard and sacrificed so much, the graveyards didn't have room enough for all the bodies. The philosophy of life they preach and profess, when enacted, is one of despair, destruction, and death. In every conduct, liberalism is making mankind bankrupt. And like any bankruptcy, responsibilities dumped become burdens others have to pay for. Liberals are moral relativists who think that there are no true or false, right or wrong, good or evil. I'm not sorry to tell them, with all the disrespect due, that they are mistaken, flat out. Their belief is false, their opinion is wrong, and the position they are holding is evil. Their statement that there is no true or false defeats itself just by saying it. If there were no true or false, then neither can they hold up their own. No right or wrong, no good or evil. Conservatives need to laugh till we get indignant about these two postulations that spineless liberals make. They hold these reckless theories only as long as wrong or evil stays out of their own backyard. Morality is simply choosing what is right, true, and good over what is wrong, false, and evil in your life, to determine the actions you will take to set the direction of the course of your life, and to use when you judge others. Rather than giving up rights, literally and figuratively, we should be giving up wrongs. The more we passively acquiesce moral neutrality, the more we give up our right to free choice altogether. The only winner to come out of a compromise between right and wrong is wrong, between true and false, false, between good and evil, evil. Life does not work without morality. We are beings that pass judgment. America was founded on the fact, counting that we would. And America is choking on moral relativity. Liberalism sees free will as a weak forever excuse that people don't really mean to do what they themselves choose to do. As a conservative, I see the constant misuse of this power and responsibility as literally spitting in the face of whatever God you believe in. It is the ultimate disrespect for your creation, the gift of your life. If I can be so bold, and I don't think anybody's going to stop me, I believe too many of us are missing something vital in the translation when it comes to the references of God, Creator, Supreme Judge of the world, and divine providence in the Declaration of Independence. And for that matter, the translation is skewed when it comes to all the religious references all the writings of the founding times are animated with. Our faith does not need to know the formula behind creation for us to have our belief. However, neither does our faith need to know the formula behind creation to understand our humanness. Even if the answer to it all were discovered and we could even touch it, it would not change what our humanness is required by its nature to do. We are created just as we are for the very reason to use what we are. Every other creation uses the nature of what it is. The human being is no different. Certainly, we are not beings created to not use what we are. The human being's life has never worked that way. Horace Mann said, "Be ashamed to die until you have won a victory for humanity." There is no greater victory to win for humanity than to actualize all your human potential, physically, mentally, and spiritually. Live up to the means endowed you. And this is the most lethal aid you can contribute to conservatism toward the defeat of liberalism. Of all the things you cannot control, you must control the greatest potential weapon, yourself. Conservatism has all it needs of do your best, all we can do is our best, or you did your best. These are sorry, worn-out platitudes. It is sorrier that conservatives still tolerate them. Enough already. Conservatism needs people ready and willing to actualize the entirety of their human potential. You are at an age where it is time to dedicate yourself and pick up arms, intellectual arms, self-responsibility arms, self-discipline arms. Contemporary and comfortable as these times are, I believe the classic words Thomas Paine wrote during cold wintry days, these are the times that try men's souls, are words better fit to today's times. Because today's times are trying truly the souls of all people more than ever. When Thomas Paine wrote those words, you can bet it was the physical pain and suffering conditions the men were subjected to that they found more trying than the pervasive degeneracy, ignorance, and literal destruction of soul that people face today. Ask yourselves, think for yourselves, and determine for yourselves. Am I going to be a summer soldier or a sunshine patriot who shrinks from the service of my country? Or will I become a full-blown warrior for conservatism, the ultimate in patriotism? Take the same dedication and determination you use to fight for the knowledge you have that there can be no compromise between freedom and government controls, that to accept just a few is to surrender the principle of inalienable rights, and that this done incrementally will swallow whole those individual rights, thus delivering us all into enslavement. Take like dedication and determination and use it to inspire yourself to an equal level of refusal to compromise conservative principles. Traditional conservatism cannot compromise on its principles. Moral treason there is treason against tradition, and treason there is no less than treason, in my mind, against America. I mean, you have to ask yourself, just exactly what kind of world do you want to raise your progeny in? Just what is it you are wanting to preserve? And how much are you willing to do to get the job done? There's nothing more destructive to conservatism than the idea one must never pass moral judgment on the thinking and acting of others, that one must be morally tolerant of anything, and that good consists of never distinguishing good from evil, right from wrong, true and false. A half-ass, middle-of-the-road, agnostic moral attitude betrays what is good, and that, my friends, is conservatism. Yes, to pronounce moral judgment is an enormous responsibility, but when you do not, you further liberalism. Today's conservative cannot fear the implications of judge not that ye be judged. You must live to judge and be ready and unafraid to be judged. You must possess an unimpeachable character and flawless integrity. This strategy, in my mind, is the 21st century's version of what Russell Kirk called moral imagination, a warrior's full-blown version of morality. To paraphrase Barry Goldwater, extremism in the defense of moral behavior is no vice, and moderation in its pursuit is no virtue. There will always be things you cannot control. Therefore, to have the greatest impact, concentrate on those things you can. Your own conduct, your own thinking and acting is priority number one. There is no greater impact you can make than adhere to the practice. An example set is an example learned always. You must be ruthless with yourself to assert confidence in justified moral superiority and carry ruthless brazenness into speaking up in situations where your silence may be mistaken. Will you be one of those people who say there are two sides to every issue, therefore nobody is either fully right or fully wrong? Or will you be one of those who finds that that moral compromise slowly poisons the thinking and acting of humankind, brings your loved ones closer and closer to tyranny or annihilation? Will you or will you not be one who says both sides do not have equal moral authority? Will you find that the tolerance of this moral compromise feeds the irrational fantasy that there are no black and white and that people are simply unable to be wholly good, true, and right? Or will you decide on the side of truth that people are simply unwilling? Will you be one who finds the courage to be one of the willing? Douglas MacArthur said it is fatal to enter any war without the will to win it. Ask yourself, do I believe, as the founders of this great country believed, that I am the ultimate manifestation of the Creator's desire? After all, your fingerprint makes you different than the other 6 billion people on this planet. Do you believe your challenge is to fulfill that unique potential? Because don't ever forget, heroes begin human. Your life is weaved throughout the whole of society's fabric. It is intimately connected with the past and will be with the future. Mankind's history verifies this. There is no joke to be made out of that. You are entrusted with an inheritable responsibility, just as John Dickerson, a signer of the Constitution, eloquently laid out. Honor and justice and humanity call upon us to hold and to transmit to our posterity that liberty which we received from our ancestors. It is not our duty to leave wealth to our children, but it is our duty to leave liberty to them. No infamy, inequity, or cruelty can exceed our own if we, born and educated in a country of freedom, entitled to its blessings and knowing their value, pusillanimously deserting the post assigned to us by divine providence, surrender succeeding generations to a condition of wretchedness. Are you going to think and act today as if you believe the consequences of your choices will have an effect on this world not just 10 to 20 years from now, but 100, 200, or 300 years from now? Or are you going to surrender succeeding generations to a condition of wretchedness? Ask yourself the question the founders surely did. Will you do in your life what will live forever? Will you? God bless you. Thank you for having me. I don't want to see it.